Welcome to episode 8, Surviving the Mass Shooting. After the funeral services and the Shiva at the home of the late Lori Lynn Gilbert Kay, being there with her dear husband, Dr. Howard, and their daughter Hannah, the community came together and we prayed the 3 prayers in their house. Guests and dignitaries from all over came. Someone actually came and brought a peace tree and planted it in their garden. It's a beautiful tree of peace that shows 4 different directions in many languages, how the world needs to be united as one because we're truly one. It was that next day when I am notified that the President of the United States has invited me to come to Washington to be part of the day of prayer. And arrangements was made right away. I had a day to prepare to go to Washington to be part of the day of prayer. I've never been to Washington before. I've never been to the White House before. I've never seen the president before. I did talk to him just a few days before, so I had no idea what was happening, what was going to be happening. What I did know was that the moment of the shooting on, I surrendered to God. I surrendered to the world, that I realized that my survival, the chance of surviving a mass shooting at point blank, is a miracle of miracles. It humbled me so much so that I considered myself nullified, that I am just existing as a messenger for God. And whatever God needs me to do, I'm going to do. And that's how I processed all the interviews with all the networks. I don't even remember what I said. I was just raw, organic, pure, heartfelt emotions. Just talking what my reflexes tells me to talk. Of how do you deal with such darkness? How do you deal with such a horrific, terrible atrocity to humankind, to the Jewish people, coming and with intentions to annihilate every single Jew who was praying there that day? So I was in a whole different mode. I was selfless. I was just nullified to God, surrendered to God, and say, use me as you need me. And if I'm going to Washington, I'm going to Washington. That evening, I get a phone call that there are some gentlemen, some rabbis from Los Angeles who want to meet with me. And they came to my house and they sat around the dining room table with me. And they presented me with a proposal. And they said, you survived for a purpose. None of us know why God wanted you to survive this shooting. What we do know is that you have an opportunity now to go to Washington. And you may or may not meet the president. We don't know if you will or not. But if you will have a chance to meet the president face to face, and if you will have a moment to talk to him, we want to suggest something to you. And these were the children of Rabbi Cunin, the first rabbi who opened up a Chabad center in the 60s in Los Angeles. Rabbi Cunin worked tirelessly for the Rabbi and to try to help the Rebbe in every area possible. One of those areas were about a library of books that were confiscated during World War II, a library of manuscripts of books from hundreds of years that were confiscated, and Russia now holds on to it as hostage. And it was a very personal pain to the Rebbe that these books that belongs to Chabad, that belongs to the dynasty, is sitting on a pallet in a warehouse in Russia, and Russia would not let it go. So they asked me if I would consider, when I'm talking to the president, if I get to talk to the president, if I could ask the president to intercede on our behalf and talk to Mr. Putin to free the books, return the books to its rightful owner, to the library in New York. When Rabbi Kunan's children asked me to do this mission on behalf of their father, I felt compelled, I felt privileged, because this was a tall order. It's been so many years, decades, that we've been trying to get some movement to free these books. And it's like a real hostage, try to free them. And no one was able to do it. And yet I'm going to have a chance to talk to the leader of the free world and to implore upon him to free these books. Rabbi Kunan and his children told me that you are now our soldier. We are there for you. We'll always be there for you. We have your back. So that's turned me into a soldier of a nature that I never thought I would be. And I thought to myself, well, maybe this is the reason why my life was spared. Maybe this is the reason why I didn't die. Maybe this is my purpose of existence, so that I could be the emissary to look the president in his eyes and to ask him to lift up the phone and call Putin and to free the books. You could only imagine the responsibility, opportunity that I found myself in. I could barely sleep that night. The next morning we had morning services, and I was driven to the airport, San Diego. The local news channel followed us all along the way for the whole trip. My youngest brother, Rabbi Zalman Goldstein, accompanied me. My son, Rabbi Mendel Goldstein, accompanied me as well. And we made our way to the airport. We arrived in Washington, stayed overnight in one of the local hotels. The next morning, Thursday morning, this was the Thursday after the shooting. Thursday morning, I was picked up and I was driven to the local Chabad center of Washington. There was a morning services to be held over there. Now, there are 4 times that a person is obligated to say a certain prayer of thanks to God. One of those is when you are saved from certain danger. When you survive a certain danger, you are to approach the Torah and say a special prayer of thanks to God. This would have been my first opportunity since the shooting to be able to be part of a service with the Torah reading. And indeed, I was called up to the Torah and I got to say the prayer. I have never sobbed so much, with tears of thanks and gratitude to God for sparing me and saving my life from a near-death experience. I'll never forget the moments holding on to the Torah and thanking God for that miracle. There were various dignitaries who were there. We had breakfast, and then we made our way to the White House. Now, I've never been to Washington, D.C. before. I've never been to the White House. We go through security, and I arrive at the Rose Garden. At the Rose Garden, there's a bunch of chairs, various dignitaries, other clergymen from other faiths, other rabbis were there. And basically, I wasn't given much information or instructions. I had no idea what my presence is going to be there. What role, if any, am I going to play over there? And they told me where I'm going to sit. And I was sitting in the front row when all of a sudden, Jared Kushner's chief of staff, Avi Berkowitz, comes over to me. And he whispers in my ear, he says, okay, I want you to pick 2 people and come with me. I says, where? Just pick 2 people and come with me. Then I started to think to myself, if I'm going somewhere and Avi is calling me, it's got to be something special. So I looked to my son, Rabbi Mendel, and I looked to my brother, Rabbi Zalman. I says, please come with me. And I follow Avi Berkowitz. And he brings me into the White House. And as I'm following him, I'm walking down the hallway. I suddenly see the vice president. The vice president sees me, gives me a hug and embrace. That was such heartfelt words. And we're talking for a little bit. When all of a sudden I see that the vice president looks up, and I turn around and I see the president of the United States of America walking towards me. At that moment, I had no idea what the plan is. No one's telling me anything. I didn't even know what to say. What do I say? What don't I say? I'm in autopilot in God's hands. God, whatever you need me to do and say, I'm yours. The president looks at me. At the time, I had both of my hands bandaged. I had a cast on both hands for the amputated finger and for the mangled finger. So it was really, I had one hand in a sling and the other hand barely moving. And the president looks at me, he gives me an embrace. And he says, Rabbi, I really enjoyed talking to you on the phone the other day. And I looked up to him and I said, Mr. President, thank you so much for calling. It was very kind of you. It was very healing. I really appreciate it. And at that moment, the president looks at me and says, you're a great guy. Why don't you follow me? Come with me to the Oval Office. I want to show you the Oval Office. Here I'm thinking to myself, wow, what am I supposed to do? I'm walking with the President of the United States of America in the White House, the leader of the free world. And I'm going into the Chamber of Chambers, into the Oval Office. How do I conduct myself? These are going to be priceless moments, opportunity. I look up to God. I say, God, please give me the inspiration I need to accomplish what I have to accomplish. As I walk through the doors to the Oval Office, I see the president's wife, the first lady, standing there. I nod my head to her. She nods back. And the president looks at me and says, many people who come to this office have different reactions. Some react in awe, some in fear, some in shock. What do you feel like? And I says, I feel grateful to be able to be here with you. And the president then asked me to sit down. And I said, I don't sit down in the presence of a president. And I looked up to him, and I looked right in his eyes. And I said, Mr. President, firstly, I want to thank you so much for reaching out to me right after the shooting and giving me and my community comfort and consolation. I also want to thank you for being such a good friend of the Jewish people and of Israel. I just want you to know we are so grateful for that. And I told him, you keep on supporting Israel and the Jewish people, you will find success in everything you do because God will bless you. And then I looked at him and I said, Mr. President, we need to introduce a moment of silence in the public schools. Children at a very young age need to learn that there's more to life, that there is value to life, that there is consequences for our actions, there's accountability. There's no prayer in schools, but a moment of silence we can do. And I said, Mr. President, please, can you make that happen? And then the third thing, I looked at him and says, Mr. President, this is a personal favor. This is something for me personally. You know how hurt me and my community have been through this terrible terrorist attack. We are all shattered. There is something that you can do to help us in the healing. I said, what is that? I took out of my pocket a picture of my rabbi, Rabbi Schneerson, and I showed it to him. I said, this is my rabbi, Rabbi Schneerson, from Brooklyn, New York. He says, oh yeah, the Crown Heights section. I've been there, I know. I said, Mr. President, before he died, the rabbi asked me to do whatever I can to help bring the books, his library, out of Russia. It's being held hostage. Today, that day was the Holocaust Memorial Day. And the president looks up at his advisor and says, oh, you didn't tell me that. I said, yeah, today is the Holocaust Memorial Day. During the Holocaust, they confiscated his library, all these books and manuscripts that's sitting in a warehouse in Russia. Mr. President, please lift up the phone, call Mr. Putin, and ask him to release the books and return it to its rightful owner, to my rabbi, to the library in Brooklyn, New York. Mr. President looked to his advisor. He says, okay, please write this down, the Schneerson Library. We need to follow up with it. And then the president looks at me and asks me for something that I never thought any president will ever ask me. The president asks me, Rabbi, can I have a picture with you? And he went and he sat down. He sat down at his desk. He took the Rebbe's picture and put it down on his desk. And we stood there and we took pictures. And then he looks at me and says, Rabbi, I want to appoint you to be on the board of the Washington Holocaust Museum. I said, sure. He says, nah, actually, you're too old. I want to give it to the next generation. I want your son right here. He's a handsome guy. I want him to be on the board of the Washington Holocaust Museum. And then he asks me, says, how do we pronounce your name? Is it Israel? Yisroel? Yisrael? So I told him, he says, hey, I don't want to make a fool out of myself out there. And our meeting finished. His daughter greets me and says, please let me walk with you out of the Oval Office and show you where the Rose Garden is. And as we're walking, I look at her and I said, you're here in the White House. You remind me of Queen Esther. The influence Queen Esther had on the king to bring salvation to the people. You have the same mission. God put you here so you can have the influence on the president that he continues making the right decisions. And she appreciated that. There's some beautiful pictures of her and I walking together. We come to the door leading up to the rose garden. And she says, please, Rabbi, go. And I said, no, ladies first. She says, no, Rabbi first. I said, no. Tell her my mother taught me, always respect a woman. Woman always goes first. And she chuckled and smiled and she went ahead. I go to the rose garden and I sit down at the front row, the designated place. And what happened after that, I could never, ever, ever fathom or imagine what is going to be asked for me to do. Please tune in to the next episode, episode number 9, where I'll share with you the most incredible experience of my lifetime. A task that I never thought I will have to do, and I did. Please subscribe and look forward to episode 9. God bless you. God loves you.